started her journey in very much the same place you are, but she was in San Diego. So she was part of San Diego City College and was part of the Mesa program, STEM programs there. And then she transferred to UC San Diego as an engineering major. And you're going to hear about her progression, kind of how she got where she is today. She's now at Stanford. So when we met her at these workshops, all these posters here were done by our students as well as Stanford PhD students to explain kind of the science that you're interested in and that you're working on to general public, people who aren't necessarily deeply involved. So we met her at the workshops, and she was saying, I've been looking for the Mesa program near me because when I go home, I go visit my community college, but there must be some around here. So we said, we're here. So that's how we found Gaby. And she's working as a mechanical engineering student, and she was telling us earlier that she started out thinking she wanted to be in aerospace, and how she got from aerospace to working on knees, which is what she's working on now, like the knee in your leg. As a mechanical engineer, it's going to be pretty interesting to hear. One other thing about her that we just learned is that she was voted the National Graduate Student Role Model of the Year by SHIP, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. So, bravo! So I'm going to turn it over to Gaby, and she's going to tell us, the path she took, what she's doing now, and advice she has, when she was in your shoes, what she wish she had known. Thanks, Gaby.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to do the Johnny Cash voice. Yeah. I'm Gaby. I'm a third-year PhD student at Stanford. And like Kat said, I really basically started like you guys. I went to San Diego City College, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit of some other stuff too. But it's really, to me, it's really cool to be here because it feels like I've come full circle. And I was there and I'm here. So I'm hoping that all of you one day come back and are part of the STEM Teacher Series. And if you're not here anymore, you go to wherever you are and find the youth program and find the STEM Center and you do the same. So I try to put a lot of pictures and be colorful because there's not enough color in here. So this is sort of how I wanted to present my journey. And I'm going to talk about my research later on too, but I wanted to talk about how I made it here first. So first I was born. And so this is my family. I'm the oldest of three, and I grew up in a family that pretty much encouraged me from when I was born to go to college. And to me, going to college was never a question of should I or should I not go to college, because my parents didn't go to college, and so they always knew how important it was and how much their lives would have been better if they had gone to college. And so they encouraged us from the very beginning that we should always go to college. And so more of, should I or should I not go to college? The question was, what should I do when I go to college? We're actually a family of community college students. I was the first one to go to San Diego City College, and then my brother from the left, he's a year younger than me. He ended up going to the same community college that I went to. He spent a little bit more time in the community college and is almost done with his undergrad in computer engineering. And then my mom went to the same community college that I went to, and she's about to finish a degree in Spanish. And my little sister is at the same community college, so we're sending my dad next. He doesn't know it yet, but So why engineering? Although I had a really supportive family, I was born and raised in Mexico, so my family had very structured cultural norms, and so they pretty much enforced gender roles to expect. So I never got to play with Legos. So I found this Lego high heels, and I thought they were really cool. If I actually found them in the store, I would probably buy them. So my family was very, like I said, they were very much enforcing gender roles, and so I never played with tools. I never helped my dad with fixing anything around the house because that was my brother's job. And so as a girl, I got tools and I could play with my mom's makeup and do my nails, and so I don't really think I had any early childhood experiences that made me want to be an engineer. But later on, when I was already in middle school or probably beginning of high school, is when I really started thinking about math and how I really liked math and how I wanted to do something that had to do with math. I remember from the very beginning in elementary school that I just liked learning and I liked being in school. And apparently my mom liked to talk about how they used to hide my lunchbox because if I wasn't behaving, they would say you're not going to school anymore, and then I would start behaving. And so I just really enjoy being in the learning environment. And I think it's something that's very recurring in my life, and that's the reason why I came back to grad school. So my family moved to the U.S. when I was 17 years old. At that time, I already knew that I had a very strong desire to do something that had to do with math, but in my head, if I went to school and I did math, I was just going to be solving problems all day long, and then they really wouldn't have any useful application, and I was very misinformed, and I know that I have a lot of math friends that did math majors and do a lot of really cool, really applied things, but I had this really big misconception that if you do math, you don't do anything useful, and so I thought, I really like math, but I want to do something useful, so I should do engineering. And then I started looking at a different types of engineering, and I really found something interesting in almost every engineering field that I read about. So when we moved to the U.S., I went to East Lake High School, and that's their logo, they're the Tigers. And over there, they had an introduction to engineering design class, and I took that because I just wanted to know what it was. And I had a really good time taking that class, and that really reinforced my desire to go to school in engineering. And so, while I was there, I actually realized that I couldn't go to college. And so, being the first in my family to go to college, we had just moved. And I was the oldest one, and out of my immediate family, nobody was living in the U.S. I really had nobody I could ask for advice. Nobody knew anything about the educational system. And so it was up to me to figure out what I was going to do. And I really thought I wouldn't go to college. And I thought, well, that's the end of my dreams. I'm probably going to get married and have somebody's kids, and that's it. And so then I started looking at the community college system. And I got a lot of people that would tell me all these horrible things about the community college and how I was just going to get stuck in some void and I would never leave and nobody would ever hear from me again, and I was better off just going to work and just skipping the community college. But I still went to the community college, and so that's the next step on my little roller coaster thing. So I went to San Diego City College. The first thing that I had to do was to declare a major, and like I said, I had this thought of how I wanted to do engineering, but I wasn't sure what type of engineer I wanted to be, and so I always thought I wanted to be either an aerospace engineer or a bioengineer. And it was weird because they really don't have anything to do with each other, and I couldn't find any common ground, but I really wanted to be one or the other. And I think I wanted to be a bioengineer because I said, oh, looking at biology applications is really cool, and I can make a robotic arm or something, and that sounds really impressive. And I think I wanted to be an aerospace engineer because I wanted to be an astronaut. And I think that went away when I realized that astronauts are not usually aerospace engineers, and so I said, well, I could do that. So while I was deciding what to do, I became very involved. And part of it has been that I think as I grew up, my family moved a lot, and so I got really used to adjusting really quickly to a new environment. And the way I used to do that was by just finding people that I could relate to and just holding on to them and making new friends right away. And so I became really involved right away, and I looked for organizations that would allow me to be involved. And I think on my first week of the community college, I became an associated student government senator. I have no idea why anybody thought I was qualified to be a senator or anything and represent anybody, but they said, yeah, if you want to take it, we'll give you some money and you can join our group. And so I became a senator, and one of the first things that I had to do was find an organization on campus that I had to represent. And I had no idea what organizations were on campus because this was my first week of the community college. And so I got a list of organizations, and I went through the list, and I found SHIP, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And I thought, well, I want to be an engineer, and I'm Hispanic, that sounds like me. So I joined SHIP, and then a few months later, I resigned my post as a senator to become president, chapter president. And then I stayed as chapter president for 2 years. So I'm just listing here the things that I think helped me get through community college and make me a strong applicant when I was trying to transfer. And this helped me not only in getting into the next stages of my academic career, but also in navigating through them as well. And so when I transferred, I actually never felt like I was in a new place because I knew a lot of people from all the things that I used to do with SHIP and all the things that I used to do in other organizations. So expanding my network that way was really helpful. And then I discovered the MESA program too, and so I became very involved with the MESA program. And actually, the MESA program was the one thing that helped me get through all of the educational loops and obstacles, because I really didn't know anything about. I knew I had to transfer, and I knew there was an application, but I really didn't know much about it. I didn't know anything about how you transfer credits and how do you get financial aid. I knew nothing, and so the MESA program really provided me all the resources that I needed to succeed as a community college student, and then started thinking about transferring. Oh, and this is something that I wanted to add. When I was at the community college, I've always been I always felt like I'm a very proactive person. I always thought, well, I don't have money to pay for college, but I'm going to find money to pay for college. And so the year I transferred, I received over $32,000 in scholarships, and I applied, I think, to 35-something scholarships, and I got 4 or 5. So out of those 4 or 5, they added up to 32,000. But I applied to over 30. And so I actually think I applied to a scholarship that I wasn't supposed to get because I didn't meet the requirements. And then when they interviewed me, they said, we had scholarships, we had enough money to provide a scholarship to 5 students, but only 4 applied, and you were one of them. And you don't really qualify, so we'll give you the money anyway. And so after that, I just applied to everything. I mean, I didn't apply to things on purpose that I knew I didn't qualify for, but anything. I had scholarships that ranged from $500 to $20,000, and so I never said no to anything just because I said, oh, this isn't giving me enough money, or this won't be enough. And so I really feel like I spent a good amount of time working on my first personal statement. So anybody that's interested or thinking about going to that WISE meeting, I think on the 29th, you should really think about it. Because the only thing it takes is to have one good personal statement, and then after that you just recycle them and use them all over again. So then I transferred to UCSD. And that's our beautiful spaceship-looking library that if you go to the top floor, you can actually see the ocean. But I never studied there because it was too distracting, so I would always go to the basement. And that's where the engineering library was. So at UCSD, I was still thinking about whether I should or I shouldn't be an aerospace or a bioengineer. And at this point, I remember I was traumatized for life by my high school biology teacher, and I thought I never ever want to do anything that has to do with biology. And when I looked at their bioengineering curriculum, I saw, I think, 5 biology classes, and I said, no, that's too much biology for me. I already had enough biology for my life. And then I thought, well, maybe I want to do aerospace, but I'm not quite sure, so I'll pick mechanical because it seems like it's very in the middle, and it seems very generic. So I declared mechanical engineering as my major, and I never left. I actually graduated with a mechanical engineering degree. And the thing that made me stay was that I just felt like that being so generic, it was just a good background for anything that if I ever wanted to change fields and do something completely different, I might have some background on that based on my mechanical engineering degree, and so I stayed there. And so how did my community college experience help? It made me develop really good study habits. So the first 3 years that I was at the community college, I worked really hard because I wanted to keep up my grades, and I wanted to make sure I had a competitive GPA to transfer. And so I developed really good study habits. I wasn't afraid to approach professors and ask questions because I don't know how big your classes are. I think your classes are a little bit bigger than my classes, but when I was at the community college, I never took a class that had more than 20 students. So all of our teachers knew our names. And I remember being called out in my chemistry class by my professor, and they would say, I just graded your homework, and I noticed that you missed this and this and that question, so you're obviously not getting this concept. You should come to office hours and I'll explain it more in depth. And so that made me develop that confidence to go talk to my professors, and I always felt they cared for what I was learning, and they cared to see that I was on track. And so that helped me when I transferred, because when I transferred to UCSD, I think my smallest class had 150 students, so I went from classrooms that had 20 students to classrooms that had 150 students, and that was really different because professors would just come in and talk to the board and solve problems and never look at you. And I remember running into my professors outside of class, and I would say hi to them, but they would say hi, you know, like when you say hi to somebody, you can tell they don't know you, but they're just saying hi because you said hi. So that's how all of my professors were. So I started going to office hours because I wanted them to get to know me, and so the professors that knew me was because I was always the one student that went to office hours, and I was always the one student that sat in the front. And I would stay after class and answer some questions, and I think they appreciated that somebody cared about whatever it is that they were teaching that probably nobody else cared about. And then studying as part of the group, that was very important, and that's something that I still use even now as a grad student. You learn a lot from your professors, and you learn a lot from just being in your classroom, but you also learn a lot from the people that you study with. So if you're ever in a study group where you feel you're the smartest person, you're probably in the wrong study group. You should go somewhere where you feel really dumb and you feel like everybody else knows more, because that's where you learn the most. So sometimes you gotta be a little selfish and just go learn more for yourself. And so studying as a group was a really useful tool, just because when you're able to explain something to somebody, that means that you understand it. And so if you're not able to explain a concept to somebody else, then you probably need to study a little bit more. And some of the challenges that I had, actually the biggest and only challenge that I had was running into people that thought I shouldn't be there. And I had one particular professor that one time told me, I don't believe you're a student, like I don't believe you transfer from a community college, because community college students are not successful at the university, and you're the first in my class, and I don't believe you're a community college student. And I could never get him to admit that I wasn't an extraordinary person, that a lot of, actually everybody that was doing good in his class, we were all transfer students that transfer at the same time. And I occasionally would run into people like that, and that was a big challenge because I took a personal offense to that, and it was hard to get past that. So once I transferred, well, I guess before I transferred, my main focus had been transferring to UCSD, and so the only thing that I would think of was I need to do this to transfer, and I need to do this to transfer. And so once I made that jump and I transferred to UCSD, then I thought, well, now I'm here, what am I going to do now? And so I thought, well, I have to get my degree, and then after I get my degree, then I need to figure out what I'm going to do with it. And so that's the first time that I thought of grad school versus industry. And it's something that even now I still think about it. So when I transferred, I really didn't know what a master's was. And sometimes I now putting this on the big screen because I think it's a little embarrassing, but I really didn't know what a master's was. And I remember hearing people talk about research, and I'm like, what is research anyways? And so I started, once I transferred, I got more exposed to all of this, and I remember going to talks where I would meet people that got master's degrees, or I would talk to the TAs in my classes that were all grad students, but to me, grad students were this sort of weird breed of sort of students that were kind of similar to me, but not really, and they were in other stratospheres and other things. And being involved in professional engineering societies like SHUB, they really emphasize that you need to have industry experience. So the first thing that I thought was, oh, I should get industry experience, I should look for internships. And so I have my first internship at Boeing. And this is me doing a really poor job of pretending to be flying this airplane. I moved to Washington for the summer, and I did my first internship. And it was a very, very significant experience in my life because it was the first time that I was away on my own for the first time. And my parents really didn't want me to go, but I went anyways. And then after that, they were okay. It was the first time that I actually saw what an engineer did, and you know what it was like to be an engineer and sit in your cubicle and do your work and go home and spend all your money. And yeah, that was the first time I earned some real money. And so then I came back from my internship and I thought, oh, Boeing was really cool. I really liked it. And then I thought, well, maybe I should give this research thing a try, a chance. And then I thought, when I thought about research, I really thought about these people. And I don't know how many of you before you went research scientists like me. I hope I don't look like these people, but I remember that was really what it came to my head when I thought about research and science. So I became part of the McNair Scholars Program. How many of you have heard of the McNair Scholars Program? Well, now you all have. So when you all transfer, you need to look for your McNair program. It's a federally funded program. and they fund you to do research as an undergraduate, and then they provide opportunities to present your research, and that's very valuable. So I became part of this program, and I did research at the Center of Excellence for Advanced Materials at UCSD, and this is how we did research. That was the grad student that I worked with, and then this is our advisor, and we're just posing for pictures that they were using for some like articles they were writing about him. And my research was really cool. My research was studying self-healing polymer, and this polymer is based on these really weird types of bonds that are thermally reversible. I had no idea what they were until I started working on this, and I still have a hard time understanding what they do. But basically, when you put the samples that you break, so the samples look like the picture that I have on the left. When you load them and you make a crack propagate, but then you put it in an oven, not to melt it, but just to increase the temperature. All those bonds that were broken, they get reversed, and then they bond back together, and then the crack goes away. That's really cool. And this is a collage of me doing presentations. I don't know how good you can see it, it's kind of dark. But I think that's the picture that they used on the flyers. This is from when I presented at the SACNAS conference, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. And that picture on the top, on the far left, the girl in the yellow, that's me because I won an award at that conference. And I would like to talk about that. So this program gave me the chance to really present my research, and the little research that I did, and how as little as it was compared to the overall like big project that it was, it made me feel like I was making some sort of real contribution to a real life project. So I really like research, and I really like my research experience. And I actually kept doing research after that summer as a volunteer in that lab. And then I continued my involvement in a number of other organizations. So I mentioned the McNair program. I continued being involved with SHIP. I became a regional student representative my senior year, and then SACNAS, and then these other organizations. And I'm just listing them here because I know a lot of you are thinking about transferring to UC system schools, and a lot of the UCs, most of the UCs have all these programs, and a lot of other places too, so you should check them out. They're really good resources. So then, the grad school versus industry thing came back, and so now I had my internship experience and I had my research experience, and I still didn't know what I wanted. And so I thought, research was really cool, but it wasn't really that cool, and I don't know if I really want to do this. And then at this point, when I was about ready to graduate, I had spent 5 years of countless sleepless nights, and I was really exhausted. And I had heard before that engineers make money, and so I thought, I want to make some money. And I had an offer from Boeing after my internship, and it was still waiting, and so I went to Boeing. So I graduated with my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering in the spring of 2010, and I took my job offer from Boeing, and I moved back to Washington. That's the 747, the airplane that I used to work on. I was a wing test certification damage tolerance specialist for the 747-8, and it sounds really fancy, that's why I put it up, because it makes me feel cool. But I basically just did a crack propagation analysis, and my job involved working with the team that developed the inspection plan for the airlines, and we would basically tell the airlines how often they should check the airplane to figure out if there were any critical components that had to be fixed before you fly again. So I would look at how cracks propagated, and then I would tell them, this is when your part is going to fail. So it was really cool. And I was so good because I was making money and traveling, and I was flying my family up there to visit me, and it was all fun. But then I realized I wanted to go to Stanford to get a PhD. And why I wanted to go to Stanford for a PhD was actually a combination of multiple factors. The first one was that even though what I did at Boeing sounded really cool, it was the first time that I felt I stopped learning. And so having been a student all my life, I go to Boeing and I go through my training, and then they basically teach me how to do one thing, and then I do my first analysis as a structural analyst, and then they give me another part, and then they say, do I have to do the same thing again? And then they say, yeah, this is what we train you to do. And so it just felt very repetitive, and it felt like I wasn't learning anymore. And so this wanting to learn theme that I had since I was a kid, it just kept coming back. And so I thought, maybe I should really think about this research thing again, and maybe I should go get a PhD. And at this time, I think I also realized that, not at this time, I think I had realized it before, but I just was refusing to admit it, but I wanted to be a professor, and I thought about this while I was an undergrad, but there's something about saying that I wanted to be a professor that I thought would make me look uncool in front of my friends, so I would never say it out loud, and so once I was working, I said, you know what, I really do want to be a professor, so I'm just going to become a PhD, and I'll be a professor one day. So that was the reason for the PhD. Actually, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. So yeah, this thought of creating knowledge and just always learning something new about your project and being the one person that's working on that and the one person that's learning about it, it just really drew me to grad school. And then why specifically Stanford? Stanford has been my dream school because who does not want to go to Stanford? Actually, I've met people that don't want to go to Stanford, but I think they're a little weird. So I wanted to go to Stanford since the first time that I visited Stanford when I was, I think, a sophomore or junior in college. And I also wanted to be closer to my family. And my family was in San Diego. When I was in Washington, I thought it was really far away, even though it really wasn't that far away, but it just felt like I had to plan my trips with much time in advance, and it just felt like it was a big gap. And I think for my family it was important too that I was closer, and they felt that I was closer. And then on top of that, my boyfriend was in San Francisco, and a lot of people tell me that you shouldn't think about those things, but I think when you're making your decisions, you need to think about all aspects of your life. And so at this point, well, my boyfriend and I met at the community college, and we started dating when we were both community college students. And then we transferred to UC, and then he went to UCSF to get an MD PhD. And then I went to Boeing, and then I said, well, I'm going to go get a PhD at Stanford. And so now we're both here, and so it's worked out really well. And I think the reason why I thrive as a grad student is because I feel that I've been really happy in all aspects of my life. And so when you're making decisions, life decisions, a lot of people will say, just look at your career and just look at what you have to choose and what's better for you. But I think if there are other things that are important to you, you should think about them too. So then Stanford. So when I worked at Boeing, I thought, it must have been aerospace since the beginning, because now I was thinking about aerospace, and then I ended up working at an aerospace company, and I thought, this is aerospace. And when I actually applied to Stanford, I thought I wanted to do aerospace, fracture mechanics related to aerospace applications, and that's what I put in my application. And then on my visit weekend, I think it was my orientation weekend actually, the department organized a bunch of lab tours. And they had us take 2 lab tours. And I said, well, why do I want to take 2 lab tours? That seems like a waste of time. I already know what I want to do. And then they said, no, you have to pick another one because everybody has to go to the second lab tour. So I thought I picked the one area that I would never ever get involved in so that I could see what they were doing. And so I picked biomechanics. And then now I'm in a biomechanics lab. So I think during those labs, it really opened my eyes because you guys probably remember my trauma from my high school biology teacher and how I really wanted to run away from biology forever. And so when I was doing these labs, I saw how mechanical engineers were actually testing biological tissues. And then I thought, well, this doesn't seem like it's really biology, this is like engineering. It's just doing biological tissues. This is kind of cool. And so it really opened my eyes to the impact that your research could have, and not just your research, but in general, everything you do, how it could have a very strong impact on somebody else's life. And I thought, well, yeah, I could keep working on aerospace and make satellites more reliable and last longer, or I could work on figuring out how you could make somebody's knee better. So that really drew me to biomechanics, and it was really surprising to me to see the overlap between what I was doing and what I wanted to do as a mechanical engineer focusing on aerospace applications to what I could do as a mechanical engineer focusing on biological tissues. So now I am part of the soft tissue biomechanics laboratory at Stanford, and my research focuses on studying how the function and the structure of biomaterials, specifically articular cartilage and the meniscus, interact to provide the mechanical properties that tissue has. So now I'm going to talk to you about my research. I actually didn't really know what articular cartilage was or where the meniscus was. I actually had a really hard time remembering which one of your bones was the femur and which one was the tibia. And until I started doing this, I now know. And here's the meniscus, the little like wedge-shaped thing. How many of you have heard of the meniscus? It's a lot of people. I feel a little dumb now. Yeah, people usually hear about meniscus when they hear about somebody that tore their ACL or they tear part of the meniscus, and then once you know that, then you figure out that there's something in your knee that's called the meniscus. You usually don't know it's there because you don't feel it, and that's the reason why it's such a big problem. So the meniscus and articular cartilage are in your knee, and they provide, the articular cartilage in particular provides the frictionless bearing on your knee, and you have it at the end of your bones and at the end of every bone that ends in the joints. You have it in your shoulder, you have it in your wrist, you have it in your ankle. And the knee is a big problem because, well, I'll talk about it later, so I won't get ahead of myself, but the meniscus in particular, it's a little piece, it's like a piece of rubber. It actually looks like a piece of rubber and it behaves as a piece of rubber. And it's sitting in between the femur and the tibia because it helps with load transfer and it helps keeping your knee equilibrated and balanced. So the problem with both meniscus and cartilage is that they're not vascularized. And what that means is that there's no blood supply to them and there are no nerves, so when you start degenerating, you don't feel pain. And you actually feel pain when you have no cartilage left and you have bone-to-bone contact, and it's really painful. And so it's a big problem because this is basically osteoarthritis. How many of you have heard of osteoarthritis? So osteoarthritis is a disease of the joint. It's basically wear and tear. It's most common in the hands, hips, and knees. And it's a big problem in the US because it's one of the leading causes of disability. So at some point, once you have osteoarthritis and you have no cartilage left and it's really painful to move, then you stop moving. Over 27 million people in the US are affected by the disease, so there's a lot of people that are affected in some level, and it's over 10% of adults between 25 and 74. And so for the longest time, even now, the way people diagnose osteoarthritis is by taking an MRI scan of your knee, and then they see there's no cartilage left. So then they look at the scan and say, oh, there's no cartilage, I have osteoarthritis, it sucks. So you have really bad case of osteoarthritis, then they do a knee replacement surgery. That's really invasive, and so right now there really isn't a way to detect osteoarthritis at very early stages because, as I said before, since the tissue is not vascularized, you don't feel pain, and so nobody will send you to the doctor to get an MRI scan just to check how your knee is doing if you don't feel any pain, because MRIs are really expensive. So our research in my lab focuses on trying to understand the mechanical properties of tissue and trying to relate mechanical changes in articular cartilage and the meniscus to hopefully use all that knowledge one day to be able to develop some sort of diagnostic tool to detect osteoarthritis at an earlier stage. So this is a composition of meniscus and articular cartilage. It's basically water, collagen, and these little things called proteoglycans. Are very, very long proteins in cartilage and meniscus. The main type of proteoglycan is aggrecan. And the reason why we care about this is because proteoglycans have this little side chains that I circled over there. They're called glycosaminoglycan, that we call GAG for short, and they're negatively charged. And so these negative charges, they repel each other. And so that's what provides the compressive stiffness of your tissue. So if you're pushing down on your tissue, but there's all these compressive charges that are repelling each other, then it provides a certain stiffness. And then the collagen fibers, if you think about, I always think about collagen fibers as like a piece of hair. If you pull on it, it's hard to break it. But if you just push down, it doesn't really carry any load because it's not stiff enough. And that's kind of what collagen is. And that's its role, so it provides the tensile stiffness for the tissue. So usually we quantify degeneration of the tissue by measuring GAG. There's pieces of chains that stick around and they are freed from the particles and they leave the tissue and they're in the surrounding fluids, and so that's how we measure degeneration in the lab. So what I'm studying specifically is how osmotic swelling affects the mechanical behavior of the tissue. And osmotic swelling is important because it's what preserves the hydration of the tissue. And how many of you know what's the first thing that happens when you injure your knee? It swells, right? So it's like one of the first things that happens, and it severely affects the behavior of the tissue. And so to explain how osmotic cloning works, I found this really cool video on YouTube. And so what they did on this video, they basically took 2 eggs and then they put them, I don't know how many of you have done this experiment before. I actually haven't. Every time I see this video, I think I'm going to go home and do it. And then I'm always missing an ingredient. So you take 2 eggs and then you put them in vinegar. And then the vinegar dissolves the shell and you end up with this like really soft membrane. And then, so that's how those 2 eggs. And then, and everything that's inside the egg is still there. And so then first they put it, the one on the left is in a hypotonic solution. And hypotonic just means it has less solids. And then the one on the right is going to be cornstarch, which is a hypertonic solution, which means that it has more solids. So what's going to happen with the eggs is that the hypotonic solution is really going to make the eggs stay the same because it's the same number of solids in the egg and the water. But the hypertonic solution on the right, since it has more solids, is going to make the water in the egg come out, so the egg is going to shrink. So we're going to see it now with this little cool demonstration. I actually think if I actually did it at home, I would be very bored because it takes about 8 hours. So I think it's really cool, but I don't expect other people to think it's really cool too. So that's the egg that was on the hypotonic solution. It's pretty much the same as it was before. And then they're going to show the hypertonic one right now. So that's the one that shrank, and it significantly changed its mass. So you can tell how like squishy it is. So there's more things to the video, but they're not as cool as that. There's also a really cool video about osmotic flooding that has to do with gummy bears. It's really cool. I also like that one too. So some of you might wonder how, like I did when I joined this lab, how do you test things in the knee if your knee's inside the body? And so we don't. At least my lab doesn't. We actually test immature bovine joints, which is basically baby cows. My family thinks I became a butcher when I joined grad school because I send them pictures of my cow legs that I get shipped from some farm, and I have to dissect them, and so they think it's just like I'm cooking something. And so it's all for science, but they don't believe me. So we get the composition of meniscus and articular cartilage on cows and humans is actually very similar, and so we take the meniscus and some plugs of articular cartilage from this leg that I get, and this is how I usually cut my specimens, and then we test them in a load frame, and I'll talk about this in a little bit. So as a mechanical engineer, what I'm interested in, I do a lot of biochemical analysis so that I can understand, what's the collagen content, what's the proteoglycan content, and the water content. But what I'm really, really interested in is the mechanical properties. And so we do mechanical testing, we do dynamic compression, and so this is basically just to set up how it is. You put your little sample, and then you have an indenter that's controlled by a computer, and then you say you tell how much you want it to compress your sample by, and then it does a dynamic oscillation, and it tells you what the dynamic modulus is using this really fancy equation. And we usually have some program that does it for us. And then the other type of loading that you see in your knee, so if you think about the types of loading that you see in your knee, I think it would be really hard to have any sort of tensile loading because you don't ever have anybody pulling on your legs, usually, unless somebody's torturing you. But so usually the loading that your knees see are compressive loading, so it's just your body weight that's being carried by your knee joint. And then you do see some torsional loads depending on the types of movement that you're doing. So the other type of test that we do is shear testing. And it's a very similar machine where you just compress your sample and then it rotates around and then measures the shear on the samples. So this is how it actually looks like in the lab. That picture on the left is our beautiful load frame that is very big compared to the samples that we see. Actually, this little red dot, it's a piece of rubber that's about the same size as my samples, so you can see how tiny they are. So we put our samples there, we put the indenture down, obviously because it's tissue, and tissue is mostly composed of water, we have to make sure there's some sort of bath in there so that your tissue stays hydrated and you don't lose all the properties because it dries out. But there's a big problem when we started doing testing on this machine of my samples. And so a lot of people do this. This is called unconfined compression, and you basically just put your sample there and you let it perform however it wants. And so the problem that we see, especially for my experiments that have to do with osmotic swelling, is that, now how many of you have done experiments before in either labs or like research experiences? So all of you guys know that when you do an experiment, you try to change just one thing, right? Because if you change multiple things, then you can't keep track of what changed and what caused certain changes. So you need to keep track of what you're changing so that you know how it's affecting whatever it is that you're measuring. So when you have this sort of information, if you're trying to measure osmotic, or trying to measure the effect of osmotic swelling, we needed to constrain this amount of information that you could have on your samples laterally, so that we said, okay, we're only deforming our samples in the longitudinal direction, and then we'll measure how it's changed. And so we couldn't do that with this machine, but we couldn't get another machine because these machines are very expensive. So then we had to figure out what to do to incorporate all of that. So then, this is also something that has to do with making the problem more physiologically relevant, because if you think about your knee joint, your knee is constrained and things don't get just squished out because you're compressing them. And so combining your samples actually makes the problem a little bit more physiologically relevant. So this is, the picture on the left is what I was showing you before, how samples can expand laterally. And this picture over here, you see those walls that are supposed to be constraining the samples, so that the only information that you have is on the longitudinal axis. So we threw ideas around, we had a big meeting, and we talked about the things that we needed, like the requirements that we needed for our samples, things that we needed, and then we came up with a drawing, a technical drawing. And then once we had our technical drawing, we sent it to the 3D printer and we got a beautiful prototype. And this is pictures of our prototype. This is very cheap and it was done really fairly quickly. And then we were able to do some testing. And after that, we had our little beautiful, shiny, final aluminum product. And so this is actually tying it all into what we were showing you today with our posters. What my poster was, I was trying to focus on showing the design process and how you start from a need and something that you might have to do, and how you take all those ideas into something, like you compile them into some drawing, then you make a technical drawing, then you get a 3D print out of it, and then you do your and then you get your final product. So my poster is the one over there that has no words and lots of colors. So what I wanted to show was just basically how it's an iterative process. And you go around once, but that doesn't mean it's your final product. Actually, on our machine part, we've discovered that there's a lot of things we should have changed that we didn't, because we were too excited with our 3D prototype, and then we just sent it right ahead to the machine shop, and then we found out that there were some things that could have been changed. And so usually people spend more time on the 3D printer stage because that's cheap and it's fast. And so you go around and then you keep going in circles until you reach whatever your final product would be. And so that's what this blurry thing is supposed to represent. So I got my master's degree last quarter. So that was the next thing. I actually did the commencement ceremony when I was at the community college, but I couldn't find any pictures. I don't think my dad probably has them. So I put some random picture over there, but it was supposed to be a picture of me with my commencement gown from this community college. And then this is from UCSB, this is from Stanford. And so now just to end, I just wanted to share some things that I feel I've learned along the way that are probably helpful to you. Be open to change and new opportunities. I really remembered all the times that I said I'm never working in a biology lab because I am not interested in biology at all, and this is what I do now. Be as prepared as you can be. I also have a story for this. I remember I had this habit of always walking around campus with a resume. I always had a resume in my backpack, because somebody told me once, you should always have a resume in your backpack because you never know when you'll need it. I always had one. And one time, my friends wanted to go to this info session for some company called Schlumberger. How many of you have heard of Schlumberger? It's an oil company where oil is extracted and usually there's nothing around. So they wanted to go to the simple session, and I said, well, is there going to be food? And they said, yes, there's pizza. And I thought, well, I'm hungry, I should go. So I went, and then when we were walking out, they were collecting resumes, and I gave them my resume because I had it in my backpack. And then the following day, I got called for an interview, and I felt really embarrassed because I really didn't care about that company, and I still went for an interview. And then 2 weeks later, they called me because they wanted to interview me on site. So they flew me to Arkansas to get an interview on site. So I got to tour big and walk around. And then it was a group interview. They were interviewing 10 of us, and they were offering a job to one of us. And I got offered the job. And I couldn't believe why. And I think it was because when they asked me if I would take the job, I said, I would really have to think about it because it's in the middle of nowhere, and I believe in energy efficient products, and I think we should preserve petroleum. And I think everybody else said, no, I would take your job offer any time. And so I think they just really appreciated that I was very truthful. But the point of the story is that I was carrying a resume, and that's why I had a job. Interactions with faculty and grad students are very important. And don't be afraid to go talk to them. I swear grad students are not some sort of weird breed of students that are just weird. And use their stories as life lessons. I feel like I've tried to do a good job of learning from my former mentors' mistakes. Sometimes I do the same mistakes they did, but sometimes you just can't help it. Build your network. To me, that was one of the keys to, I feel, being a successful, community college student and making my transfer successful, and then, going to Boeing and being successful at Boeing too. I'm actually on a leave of absence from Boeing. They've kept me on a leave because they want me to go back, and every time I tell them I'm going to stay here, be a professor, they say, you might change your mind, we're just going to extend your leave. And I think that's all because of my network, and that's because people know me, and I go talk to people, and I think they just appreciate, I hope they appreciate having me around, and that's the way they want to keep me. And so it's been very important. Actually, when I moved to Washington to take my job offer from Boeing, I was there for a day, and then the following day I had dinner with like 10 people because I knew 4 of them from SHIP, and they invited their friends, and then their friends became my friends, and then I never spent a weekend alone. And so that's very important because it's really hard to get lost in a place when you don't know anybody, you're all by yourself, and so it's important to have a network for this and other reasons. And ask for advice, but remember that advice is only a suggestion. And so I had the problem of taking people's advice and thinking that I had to do whatever they said because they advised me to, but you don't. And I think people know that when they give you advice. And if they get mad, then it's their problem. So when you ask for advice, just keep that in mind. It doesn't mean you have to do it. And don't make decisions trying to please others. It goes along with the other point. You should always just try to please yourself because trying to please others is a recipe for disaster. And don't ever listen to those who will tell you that you cannot do something because there will be people that will tell you that you cannot do something, and the only thing you can do is prove them wrong. And I remember when I was thinking about applying to grad school, and I went and talked to one of my professors from UCSD. Actually, this was the same professor that said that he didn't believe community college students would be good. I should have known this when I asked him. But I went and asked him for a letter of recommendation. I did really good in his class. I did research with him, and then and I was a really good student. And then so I told him that I wanted to apply to grad school, and then he said, "What schools are you thinking of?" And I said, "Well, I'm either going to Stanford or Berkeley." And then he said, "Oh, you're never going to get into Stanford or Berkeley." And then I said, "Well, why not?" And then he said, "Well, your GPA is not good enough." I'm like, "What do you mean my GPA is not good enough? I have a pretty decent GPA." He's like, "Well, your GPA is not 4.0. And then he asked me about my GRE scores, which is the exam you take to into grad school. My GRE score wasn't bad, but it wasn't perfect. And then he's like, "Your GRE score is also not good. I don't want you to, I don't think you should apply because that's just, you're just going to be very disappointed because nobody's going to accept you." He said, "Even UCSD won't accept you." And so I just left his office and I thought, well, I'm going to apply to all these places and I'm going to show you that I will get into all these places. And I'm actually really glad I did because if I didn't, it would have been very depressing. But I just didn't let that get to my head. And I had one person that told me I couldn't do it, but I had a bunch of other people that told me I could. And so that's like the one takeaway point that I wanted to have that it will happen. People at some point, even maybe not when you're transferring, or maybe not when you're in grad school, but at some point in your career, somebody will say you cannot do something, and the only thing you can do is prove them wrong. And that's it. I wanted to show for the end a not so nerdy picture of me, so that you see that I also do other things other than research and talk to people. This is me. Actually, this is from when I was working at Boeing. I was part of their salsa team, and the casino team. And this is from actually a presentation that we did for a MESA program in Washington State. That's it.